radio broadcaster from the 50s through the 90s. Although he was a denominational Christian, he wrote a piece in the 1960s that intrigued me, titled "If I Were the Devil." When I read this piece, I was very interested by his perception of this Satan-ruled world, because it was an accurate description of today's society. If I Were the Devil reads, "If I were the devil, I would gain control of the most powerful nation in the world. I would delude their minds into thinking that they had come from man's effort instead of God's blessings. I would promote an attitude of loving things and using people instead of the other way around. I would dupe entire states into relying on gambling for their state revenue. I would convince people that one's character is not an issue when it comes to leadership. I would make it legal to take the life of unborn babies. I would make it socially acceptable to take one's own life and invent machines to make it convenient. I would cheapen human life as much as possible so that the life of animals are valued more than human beings. I would take God out of the schools where even the mention of his name was grounds for a lawsuit. I would come up with drugs that sedate the mind and target the young, and I would get sports heroes to advertise them. I would get control of the media so that every night I could pollute the mind of every family member for my agenda. I would attack the family, the backbone of any nation. I would make divorce acceptable and even fashionable. If the family crumbles, so does the nation. I would compel people to express their most depraved fantasies on canvas and on movie screens, and I would call it art. I would convince the world that people are born homosexuals and that their lifestyles should be accepted. I would convince the people that right and wrong are determined by a few who call themselves authorities and refer to their agenda as politically correct. I would persuade people that the church is irrelevant and out of date, and the Bible is for the naive. I would dull the minds of Christians and make them believe that prayer is not important, and that faithfulness and obedience are optional. I guess I would leave things pretty much the way they are. Now, for those of you who were around in the 60s, I think you can agree that while things may have seemed unacceptable then, the world was not near as it is today. It will be for my children and so forth. Now let's ask ourselves, why does this trend continue to slope downwards through the decades? Let's take a look at some scriptures to see how they relate to Paul Harvey's words. On the topic of promoting loving material over God, Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21. Matthew 6, 19 through 21 reads, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also." On the topic of gambling, 1 Timothy 6:10 reads, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." Ecclesiastes 7:17 deals with suicide, reading, "Be not overly wicked nor a fool. Why should you die before your time, Why should you die before your time?" And also on this topic, Jeremiah 29:11 reads, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Family values, as Harvey mentioned, are also discussed in Proverbs 11:29, which reads, "Whoever troubles in his household will inherit the wind, and the fool will be a servant to the wise of heart." Divorce, Matthew 5:31-32, "Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Homosexuality, Leviticus 18:22, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman, it is an abomination." And finally, the topic of the Bible being everlasting, Genesis 9:16 reads, "When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on earth." Obviously, there are many more coinciding points between Harvey's piece and God's Word, and plenty of other scriptures to back every above-mentioned refutation. And back to my previous question, why has this trend of ethical deterioration continued over the decades? The world has been primarily secular for centuries, and since the beginning of time, Satan has been prevalent in the lives of mankind. As Hayes read for us this morning, Ephesians 4:27, "Give no opportunity to the devil." Freely letting sin and discourse into our lives is the easiest way to forget about God, and that's when the hemorrhage begins. Have you allowed Satan into your life, as so many in the world today have? Satan is always in our lives, prodding and tempting us. We are always faced with the decision as to whether or not we will listen to him or reject him. If you've struggled with sin or any stumbling block in your life, you have the opportunity now to come forward as we stand and sing.